Across the fruited plain. The phone number, if you would like to be a part of this here program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You can get me on social media at EW Erickson. You can go to EWErickson.com. You can even email me, Erick at EWErickson.com. One note here before I begin. This is kind of housekeeping for everyone, particularly if you're listening in Texas. I think I'm the only radio show host in America that does this. I'm a political activist at heart. When I was put in charge of redstate.com back in the day, it was intellectual, long form pieces, think pieces like, and it was brilliant. And there were brilliant minds far smarter than me who wrote there. But I'm an activist at heart. I was worked in campaigns. I was a campaign manager for political campaigns. I like door knocking. I like political activism, and it's kind of was my focus. And so when I started my Georgia show, I started an action center where you can go through it. And if there's a piece of legislation in Congress or there's a piece of legislation in the Georgia legislature, you could take action and urge your members of Congress or the state house and state senate here in Georgia to do it. And as I've expanded nationally, I've made a commitment to, when there are key issues I care about in the states, that I want the people there to be as involved as I have in the years doing a local show in Georgia, had my listeners there, or nationally at Red State, or then the Resurgent, been able to get a national readership to take action. And so if you're in Texas, Matt Schaefer was on the show yesterday talking about the election package in the state legislature. He has introduced, he's a state representative from Tyler, Texas. He's introduced permitless carry. Now, those of you in Georgia and elsewhere, pay attention to this. There are 20 states that have essentially constitutional carry, where you do not have to have a permit to carry a firearm. Those states are Alaska, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. Essentially, it allows a law-abiding citizen to carry a handgun without a state-issued license to carry. There are 20 states that do it. And my home state of Georgia is not one. My native state of Louisiana is not one, which is shameful. Texas, if it passes this law, would be the 21st state to allow it. Matt Schaefer has introduced it. It's House Bill 1927. So this is something no other radio show host in America will let you do. If you text the word permit, to the number 52886, if you live in Texas, you will be able to generate emails to your members of the state legislature. If they're sponsors, they'll get a thank you for sponsoring. If they haven't signed on as a sponsor, they will get an email saying, please vote for this legislation. You can share it with your friends in Texas and make sure it gets maximum exposure. The Texas House of Representatives is voting on this legislation tomorrow. Georgia, for those of you here in Georgia where I am, legislation has been introduced in the Georgia legislature to allow permitless carry. I think it's a good thing. I get tired of having to worry about my concealed carry permit. I think you should be able to carry without a permit in any state. Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, all of you, your legislators are considering this legislation. Frankly, it's a great way to get back at the election activists in corporate America. They hate this legislation too. It's a good way to ignore them and show them that their actions have consequences. Passing this legislation in Texas would be good. Again, if you're in Texas, text the word permit to 52886. And you'll go into the Erick Erickson Show Activist Center, and you'll be able to get your state legislator, urge them to do this. Now, we must move on to national events. The Joe Biden roadmap continues to roll out, and my goodness gracious, the media is doing everything possible to defend Joe Biden and claim that everything works. Let me just read you some of this stuff, which is remarkable. This is from Politico's Playbook. Here's the headline: A gaslighting chamber of insanity. Moderate Republicans are seething at Joe Biden. It's an effing nightmare. That was the lament of a staffer working for one of the members of the so-called G10, the group of 10 Republican senators who insist they're itching to negotiate deals with the White House. In the span of a few months, they've gone from the center of politics with Donald Trump's Washington to the sidelines with Joe Biden. While they're mostly despised by Trump, these senators were the engines of his policymaking for his final COVID bill. They respect Biden, but are so far irrelevant, and it's bewildering to them. They see the White House constantly rubbing dirt in the faces of Republicans. 2 episodes stand out for them. The first was when they were invited to the White House to discuss the COVID relief bill in February. It was intoxicating. They finally had both a normal president, one who understood the Senate better than any president since LBJ, and one who recognized the Gang of 10 as the center of power in Congress. The staffer joked they were so giddy about the meeting, they had to be told to calm down and play it cool. But the next day, Schumer announced outlines of the plan to pass the bill with just 50 votes. The second episode came when Biden said the 10 senators didn't move an inch off their initial proposal during the COVID talks, even though they had. It came days after a group of senators to agree on anything. It takes days for a group of senators to agree on anything, but the 10 of them put out a statement a few hours later correcting Biden, saying the administration roundly dismissed our efforts as wholly inadequate in order to justify its go-it-alone strategy. If you get an invitation from the White House, you go to the White House, but regardless, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, said another staffer. When you go to the White House meeting, you risk being used in a feigned attempt at bipartisanship. If you don't go, it's, oh, Republicans won't ever meet with me. It all pivots on whether it's a genuine offer from the White House. Now, here's what's going on. The White House understands something the rest of us need to understand, and you get a sense of it from the way this is written. Ryan Lizza is the chief Washington correspondent for Politico. He is of the left. He's on CNN. He is a liberal. He graduated from the University of California at Berkeley. He tries to be fair, but his worldview is of the left. And he despised Donald Trump, and he loves Joe Biden, and these people are going out of their way in the media to work very hard in covering everything they possibly can to the benefit of Joe Biden. So when you got you got a group of 10 Republicans who want to cut a deal with Joe Biden, and Joe Biden uses them as a prop and says, well, thanks for coming, guys. We're going to do it our own way. And then the media says, oh, the Republicans, they wouldn't give an inch. Now, here's what they do. Here's what Liz and the writers at the Politico do. Why it's working, they say. Our latest Politico morning consult poll shows Biden continues to hit the sweet spot in terms of highlighting popular measures, even on fraud issues like gun control. No wonder Republicans are frustrated. 64% support stricter gun control laws. 63% support Biden's executive order on so-called ghost guns. Let's be honest here. Of the 63% of voters who support Biden's gun control law, about 99% don't even know what the hell a ghost gun is. Oh, I'm opposed to ghosts. Let's stop those ghost guns. We don't need ethereal guns that can float through walls killing people. A plurality of American voters somewhat or strongly support his executive order on increased regulations on stabilizing braces. 46%, they don't know what the hell that is either. 73% of voters support employees' right to bargain collectively for workplace conditions. But here's the thing. Notice the phrasing here. They support employees' right to bargain. Ask it a different way. Do you believe that someone should be forced to be in a union? That's what it's actually asking. And yet, given the way the questions are phrased, and by the way, you would note that gun control always polls very well. You know, like 90% of Americans think that gun control means teaching people how to control their gun. It is time to play this audio again. This is why you don't support public opinion polling. There was this great show back in the day. It is Yes, Prime Minister. It's a British comedy. There's this one episode where the prime minister wants to do something because it polls very well. And he's got to be dissuaded from doing it. This clip explains advocacy polling. It doesn't, listen, I actually think, although the Democrats have problems with their pollsters right now, but you can get a fairly fair sense of, like, for example, Joe Biden did win the national popular vote. Hillary Clinton did as well. The polling was able to capture that somewhat. It didn't capture the nuances of the Electoral College to that degree, though it did. At the congressional level, they were pretty terrible polls. But you can get a sensible, and who are you going to vote for, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? It's a pretty easy poll. But when it comes to issue advocacy polling, they're always terrible. Remember, back during 2009, 10, 11, and 12, even after it passed, the majority of Americans never liked Obamacare, and yet the Democrats plowed ahead with it either. And it all depends on how you ask the questions. Do you believe the government should make health care more affordable? Well, yes. Do you think the government should force you to buy insurance even if you don't have the money? Well, hell no. It all depends on how you ask the question. So let me play this clip. This again, yes, Prime Minister from the 1980s. This is probably the greatest clip ever on how to explain why this polling is so bad.
He's going to say something new and radical in the broadcast.
What, that silly grand design? Bernard, that was precisely what you had to avoid. How did this come about? I shall need a very good explanation.
Well, he's very keen on it.
What's that got to do with it? Things don't happen just because prime ministers are very keen on them. Neville Chamberlain was very keen on peace.
Yes, he thinks it's a vote winner.
Ah, that's more serious, Done. What makes him think that?
Well, the party have had an opinion poll done. It seems all the voters are in favour of bringing back national service.
We'll have another opinion poll done showing the voters are against bringing back national service.
Well, we can't be for it and against.
Of course they can, Bernard. Have you ever been surveyed?
Yes. Well, not me, actually. My house. Oh, I see what you mean.
Well, Bernard, you know what happens. Nice young lady comes up to you. Obviously, you want to create a good impression. You don't want to look a fool, do you?
No.
So she starts asking you some questions. Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the number of young people without jobs?
Yes.
Are you worried about the rise in crime among teenagers?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lack of discipline in our comprehensive schools?
Yes.
Do you think young people welcome some authority and leadership in their lives?
Yes.
Do you think they respond to a challenge?
Yes.
Would you be in favour of reintroducing national service?
Yes. Oh, well, I suppose I might.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Of course you would, Bernard. After all you've told, you can't say no to that. So, they don't mention the first 5 questions, they publish the last one.
Is that really what they do?
Well, not the reputable ones, no, but there aren't many of those. So, alternatively, the young lady can get the opposite result.
How?
Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the danger of war?
Yes.
Are you worried about the growth of armaments?
Yes.
Do you think there's a danger in giving young people guns and teaching them how to kill?
Yes.
Do you think it's wrong to force people to take up arms against their will?
Yes.
Would you oppose the reintroduction of national service?
Yes.
There you are, you see, Bernard. The perfect balanced sample. So, we just commissioned our own survey for the Ministry of Defense. See to it, Bernard.
That's exactly what you do. So when Politico comes out and says a majority of Americans support employees' collective bargaining rights, most people don't know what the hell that means. And those who do, they don't hear the word union, so they're okay with it. The media is doing everything they can to build up Joe Biden. They're refusing to ask him very critical stories. The ones they can't avoid, like the border, notice how little they try to cover the border. The Republicans went down to the border. They saw the border. They did a press conference down at the border. How many of you saw clips of what was happening at the border? I bet very few of you actually did, because they avoid like the plague covering anything that could cause problems for Joe Biden's reputation. And then they trot out polls to defend it. But keep in mind how often the polls, just take gun control as an example, how often the media trots out polls showing overwhelmingly Americans favor gun control. And then when you actually ask them the actual precise things that are going to be in the gun control legislation, turns out they don't like it that much. Oh, and by the way, overwhelmingly, when Americans find out a politician is anti-gun except in far-left enclaves, guess what they do? They vote against the person. Why is that if they're so in favor of gun control?
You can follow Eric around social.
Today is recipe day, so yes, text recipe to 33777. Okay, we need to move on here. Afghanistan is about to be back in the news. President Biden is expected to address the nation later today to announce he is withdrawing the troops from Afghanistan. Now, what's so remarkable about this, if you'll recall, is Donald Trump wanted to withdraw the troops. And the troops were going to be withdrawn based on Trump's order. And the Biden team said, whoa, we don't want him to get credit for it. So we'll withdraw him, but just do it at a later date. I've actually said for a while now it was probably time to get out. There's no point in having our troops there constantly under threat from the Taliban when the Afghan government's never been able to stand up. We were successful in wiping out their means to wage war on us. We have never been successful in providing an alternative that could stand on its own. It's probably time to get out. But the neocon. I hate to say neocon. It's such a word that really means nothing anymore. But those who believe in aggressive American action around the world aren't happy. Here's Marco Rubio.
You probably saw that the Biden administration is reportedly planning to withdraw from Afghanistan by the next anniversary, by September 11th. What do you think of that decision?
Well, it was a decision that began under President Trump. And so what they've announced is that they're going to stick with President Trump's decision with regards to Afghanistan. Look, the outcome is going to be a terrible thing. The Taliban, I believe, will eventually take over the country as they were in charge before, and it's not going to be a good outcome. The flip side of it is that I'm not sure what the pathway to a better future in the near term was. And, given all the other needs we're facing around the world, once President Trump made that decision, I think the die was cast in that regard.
Do you think the U.S. has made enough progress on training the Afghan security forces?
I mean, I hope so. I don't have a tremendous amount of I hope I'm wrong because of the implications, but I don't have a lot of faith that the current government in Afghanistan will be able to survive or hold on for long. The Taliban, my personal opinion, everything I know is that I think the Taliban will have an Afghanistan controlled by the Taliban again, and that not a good outcome, but it's the direction that we're headed. And the previous administration agreed to that. The current administration stuck with it, and that's where we're going.
I gotta say something here, and I want to actually spend time on this later in the show. I think there's a growing body of evidence, and there's a real worry that we're probably headed into a global war, and I don't say that lightly.
30.
And I want to talk about that, but I gotta say, leaving our troops in Afghanistan when the Afghan government has never done what it needed to do to get up to speed, I see no reason to keep our troops there when they're probably going to be needed elsewhere, and they probably ought to just come on home now. In any event, when we come back, we need to talk more about the Johnson & Johnson stuff. There's more news out there about that. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I just, if I ever do get around to doing coffee mugs for this program, or they're going to say people are stupid, because people genuinely are stupid. It's why I'm not in favor of an expansive, easy voting access, because stupid people will go vote, and we should have fewer stupid people voting. And I just, as stupid people is universal and worldwide. I just saw this. My buddy Joe Cunningham flagged this on Twitter. Couple forced to wear earplugs after buying dream home next to busy road. Jackie McCormick's home is just 9 feet from the busy A446, a major truck road near Warwickshire outside of London. She and her husband purchased the 3-bed in February. But since then, Jackie claims the property has been constantly shaking, and now her family even have to sleep wearing earplugs. The grandmother said, "We moved in on Friday, and on Saturday it was absolutely horrendous. On the Monday, it started with the heavy good vehicles. My house was constantly shaking. You don't get any respite at all. It's relentless. It's like living next to a motorway." It is living next to a motorway, you idiot. She actually says that they checked out the house. They had 6 or 7 viewings before making the decision to buy the house. But she believes the estate should have been more forthcoming. I'm not saying we were duped. I'm saying the real estate agents should have been a little more forthcoming with the times they were allowing us to come see. If it had been about 2 p.m., we would have said, "What the hell?" and we wouldn't have touched it with a barge pole. I'm not blaming the planners either, but how do you get planning permission to build a house so close to a road? Photos show Jackie in her garden just feet away from trucks hurtling down the road on the other side of the fence. There's lights, and every now and again you get a sway of the big vehicles. Listen, I'm sorry, but what did you think? You're buying a home that literally backs up to a 4-lane highway in Great Britain. If people are stupid, I don't have sympathy for this woman now running to the media to shame the real estate agents. I'm sorry, but that's ridiculous. It's not the real estate agents were being clever. Come when there's not a lot of traffic, and we'll show you the house. It's like if you have a house that has a leak in the roof, you don't show it on days that there's rain. What do these people expect? And then you get someone to come in and inspect the house for you, and maybe they say, "Oh, well, the house vibrates when the heavy trucks go by." I have no sympathy for these people. None. People are stupid. Do you want people like that voting? Okay. We move on. Well, no, you don't, because they're British, and they would be illegal aliens if they voted here. Nonetheless, we got to move on to the Johnson & Johnson thing. I'm sorry, but Dr. Fauci, every time he gets on TV at this point, just muddies the water further.
You bring up a good point, but there's an other side to that story, because much of the hesitancy that we encounter are people who wonder about the safety of a particular vaccine. I mean, I know I'm out there talking to people all the time. This, in fact, is a confirmation of how seriously we take safety. So rather than turning people off about it, if you pause it for a little while and said, we're very concerned to make sure that what we put in your arm is safe. We wanted to take a few days, take a look at this, get more details about it, and then very likely, I don't want to get ahead of the FDA, but very likely they'll say, we looked at it, and now we'll go back, maybe make some modifications. So to me, it's an argument for why you should get vaccinated, because the system is working. The system that is trying to protect the American people is working, which is what triggered the FDA and the CDC to do that.
All right. The system is working. So they've withdrawn let me put this in perspective for you. Hang on a second. Let me get the exact stat. I don't want to make this wrong. I don't want to mess this up, because you need to get this put in perspective. There are roughly there's a better chance of you've got a greater likelihood of getting struck by lightning than you do of getting a blood clot from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. By the way, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine side effect of this rare sort of blood clot, in addition to affecting only 1 in 1 million people, it overwhelmingly affects women. In fact, something like 29 of 31 people globally who have gotten a blood clot from the AstraZeneca or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine have been women. Now, let me put this in perspective. The risk of a blood clot from birth control pills is 1 in 1,000, and it's considered a low-risk side effect. Our government is doing a terrible job selling people and getting the vaccine. The government is doing a bad job here. Dr. Fauci goes on television and says, well, people are concerned about the rush and the risks. We want to be transparent. We want to tell them what's going on. You know, what you do is you don't come out and say, whoa, you might die from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We're going to put a pause on it so we can tell everybody. You know what that does is it tells everybody, oh, my God, they really did rush everything out. We better not get the vaccine. The idea that the government doctors, the so-called experts, they coming out and telling everyone, well, actually, this one could kill you. You got a 1 in a million chance. We better stop it. That sends a big red flag that, oh my gosh, did they rush everything? Did they rush them all? I'm seeing people who were skeptical to begin with in many cases, but not all of them. Some of them genuinely had been supportive of the vaccine. They're like, maybe they really did rush it. Maybe the critics are right. They've done a disaster. They've done a disaster in handling the situation. And that's unfortunate because what actually happens here is they undermine the overall case for the vaccine at a time. There are a lot of skeptics on the internet. There are a lot of people peddling bad information. And now the government plays into their hands, but not only plays into their hands, directly, totally undermines the entire case for getting a vaccine at this point, scaring people needlessly. There is what's called the wall of want, a term I didn't even know existed until yesterday, that at some point you hit a wall. You get everybody who wants the vaccine gets there. And in order to get more people to get the vaccine, to get herd immunity, you got to move the wall of want to further back. So more people want the vaccine. And right now we're running up to this wall of want where all the people who wanted it have gotten it, and it's still not enough to get us to herd immunity. And now the government is freaking people out with stuff like this. It's terrible, and they're causing greater skepticism and alarm. Here's a little more from Fauci.
The pause not only allows us to take a look at the cases and learn more, but it is also a signal out there to help the physicians. A common question, and I'm sure we'll have a number of questions which Jeff and I will be happy to answer to you, but one of the questions that comes up already rather frequently, does this have anything to do with the efficacy of the vaccine? So we know that there have been 6.85 million doses of J&J distributed in the United States thus far. So someone who maybe had it a month or two ago would say, what does this mean for me? It really doesn't mean anything. You're okay, because if you look at the time frame when this occurs, it's pretty tight, from a few days, 6 to 13 days from the time of the vaccination.
And there have been 6 people. Almost 7 million doses administered, 6.9 million doses now, and only 6 people have gotten this. And now you've panicked the country and probably risked people refusing to get the vaccine now. To Tyler, Texas, we go to Jamie. Jamie, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm good, and it's Janie, like Janie's got a gun.
Oh, now that's a great reference to, man, I love that song.
It's a good song. Nobody covers it, though. But good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. And the question wasn't, first of all, bless your wife for getting out in the open. But, one concern I have with this vaccine going on is that nobody's being open and upfront about the fact that it is still in its experimental phase. Right. The Moderna, the Pfizer, and the Johnson & Johnson and the AstraZeneca. It was mentioned in Governor DeSantis's round table, and although I think everybody has the liberty to do whatever they want, I'm just curious why, sources that I respect, such as yours or Tucker Carlson or Mark Levin and other sources, nobody's really announcing the fact that this is still in its experimental trials. And the CDC website even cited that they don't expect anything to be fully approved before February of 2022.
Right.
So
that's a great point. It allowed under emergency review. And I don't say it. Now, I can't speak to Tucker or Mark, and I just haven't said it because I just assume everybody kind of knows it. Maybe I should go back to saying it. But you are right. It's an emergency review. And my real frustration, Janie, is that the government has screwed up the messaging so bad. And there are a lot of people out there who are skeptical because they feel it was rushed. The underlying science is so new for a lot of people. It's something we haven't done. Normally, it can take 5 to 10 years for a credible vaccine to come out. This one's super rushed, and it has a lot to do with pools of people and experiments. But when the government rushes out with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the news out about 1 in 1 million people potentially getting a rare form of blood clot, it says, well, we need to pause this. I don't think the government or anyone else can cast aspersions on anyone who has skepticism of these vaccines. And I'm seeing it happen now. In fact, Tim Alberta, a reporter at Politico, has tweeted out that he now has had 2 friends of his reach out to him because he's been writing a story on this saying, you know what, was gonna get the vaccine and I think I'm going to wait now. And he says, you can't blame them. And what's so interesting here is that other people are attacking his friends now, saying, oh, well, they were skeptical to begin with. They're just using this excuse. I don't think they were. The government's completely screwed this up.
Well, and I understand that, but don't you think it lends itself to skepticism when you feel like nobody's being open about it?
Yes.
And anybody who basically is being censored,
Well, let me put it to you a different way that I think you're somewhat hinting at here, is that Ron DeSantis and his experts got booted off of YouTube for citing European scientific studies that the Europeans have embraced as gospel truth, but that the American government has not. And so his YouTube video got banned. If I went on YouTube or Twitter or Instagram or Facebook yesterday and said, hey, people are getting a blood clot from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we may need to slow it down, they would ban my account for saying it. And yet today the government says it and they're totally fine with it. The rank hypocrisy, the double standards, the attacks on people who are skeptical. I trust the science, and maybe I'm crazy for doing it. My wife very much wanted the vaccine. Her doctor wanted her to get it. But I can't blame people for sitting back and saying, hey, we're going to watch how this goes. Because, we did have the thalidomide situation in the 1960s as well. Look how that went.
Yeah, no, and I do understand that, but at the same time, we're at a more informed stage, and the skeptics are seeking what's being censored, and I think it would alleviate a lot of stress if it was more of the conversation. It's like platforms such as yours, you have a loud voice, you're respectable, and there should be more conversation about that, and more conversation also, I think, about the fact that the government is funding these big corporations and be looking more into where these profits are going for these vaccines that are being paid for with taxpayer money, and the fact that it should be more so recirculated back in the system. Of course, these companies deserve compensation for what they're doing, but things should be straight up front, and there should be more conversation and auditing about where this money is going, and expect it to be recirculated back into the healthcare system to cover costs such as all the PPE that had to come up, all the ventilators, all the things that we've done in amidst of this crisis, the PPE loans that have gone
the PPP loans. Yeah. Those are excellent points. Yeah. And there should be more government transparency. I totally agree with you on that.
I'm challenging you, and then get with your group of people, because you've got an excellent group of people that are very, very highly respected, and get more conversation and put more challenge, on our elected officials. I've contacted Louis Gohmert, love him. I've contacted Matt Schaefer, but we need to look at more of this and just be a little bit more open, because I think for the skeptics, that kind of direction would alleviate a lot more.
Yeah, you're right. You know what? I will. I will. In fact, I've got a chain, a text message chain with a number of people who are in Congress. They're chiefs of staff for different, a lot of them from Texas, where you are, and it's probably worth having that conversation. Now, I got to let you go there, but thank you very much for calling. I appreciate it very much. And if you want to call in, it is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I really will try to engage a little more on this, because there clearly needs to be something with the government right now screwing up concern over it. One more before we go to break. This is the president on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine situation.
My message to the American people on the vaccine is, I told you all, I made sure we have 600 million doses of the mRNA, not of either Johnson & Johnson and or AstraZeneca. So there's enough vaccine that is basically 100% unquestionable for every single solitary American.
So we got enough vaccine. It's just the government continues to sow doubt in its administration and whether or not it's going to cause people harm. Brilliant. Brilliant, guys.
News and in-depth analysis.
Hello there, it's Erick Erickson. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. For listeners in Texas, if you text the word permit to 52886, you will get a text back on your cell phone where you can click through and ask your state representative in Texas to support the constitutional carry legislation Matt Schaefer's introduced there that would allow people to carry their firearms in public without needing to apply for a permit. Text the word permit to 52886. I like using my action center and deploying it nationwide. Think of the power you can have. Now, think of this weekend. I don't know where you are listening to me in the country, But if the weather's going to be beautiful this weekend, why not grill out? And why don't you get 12 burgers for free that you can throw on your grill? You can do this by going to omahasteaks.com this morning, this afternoon, tonight, sometime today, and put in an order for Omaha Steaks. They've got their Let's Go Grillin' package. Right now, you'll get steak, pork chops, chicken breast. You'll get a dessert. You'll get sides. You will get 4 pounds of hamburgers, just about 4 pounds of hamburgers for free. It's 12 of their Omaha steak burgers. Now, these steak burgers, they're not like your standard ground chuck from the grocery store. These are beefy, flavorful burgers. They're really delicious. I actually had some this weekend. You want to get these from Omaha Steaks. So what you do is you go to omahasteaks.com. You put Georgia in the subject line. Georgia, or search bar, rather. Up at the top of the site, you'll see a search bar. Put in the word Georgia. And you will get 12 burgers for free, along with steak, pork chops, chicken breasts, you name it. Great for your grill. Great to have family over. Listen, the world is going back to normal. States are reopening. You don't have to wear your mask around your house. You can have friends over. You can grill. You can get delicious steaks from Omaha Steaks. You know, they age their beef for at least 21 days, which brings out the flavor. They do such a good job. You can probably, if you order today, you can probably get it to you by the weekend so you can grill out this weekend. It's great. Great burgers. In fact, if you don't believe me, Philip, who works for me, went to McDonald's the other day, ordered a bacon cheeseburger with just bacon and cheese on it. They gave him literally a bacon and cheese sandwich, no burger. So he went home. I had given him some Omaha Steaks, and he thawed them out real quick, threw them on the grill, and had a best burger from a fast food restaurant he's ever had. So now, go to omahasteaks.com, put Georgia in the search bar. All right, we got other stuff we got to go to. Remember all the norms? The left worried about all the norms, breaking of norms by the Trump administration. Not Norm like the Norm the guy from Cheers, but no. Breyer retire campaign looms over Dems' tenuous majority. Democrats are grappling with judicial deja vu, an aging liberal Supreme Court justice, a paper-thin Senate majority, and activist pressure to swing the bench leftward. Justice Stephen Breyer's 82, and Democrats are a single Senate seat away from ceding control back to Republicans. It's a familiar and uncomfortable bind for a party that barely nudged former Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to retire the last time they controlled the Senate and the White House, then watched the Supreme Court veer to the right. But even as some liberal groups boot up a Breyer retire campaign, the Democratic Party is sensitive to the justice's predicament. That's why neither Democratic lawmakers nor President Joe Biden are putting overt retirement pressure on the Bill Clinton appointee while their party still holds the Senate. But Breyer's future is on everyone's mind, maybe even the justice's own. Richard Blumenthal said he would never presume to tell a Supreme Court justice to retire, but Breyer himself is very familiar with the potential risks of a Republican president appointing a successor. He's well familiar with the way judicial appointments work, and I believe strongly he has in mind the best interests of the country and will make the right decision. Now, think about this, though. Breyer could wait until next year. He doesn't have to do it this year. He could wait until next year. The Democrats are going to control the Senate at least through the end of next year, so he could do it then. Well, this whole idea of retire Breyer or Breyer retire now is crazy. And the idea that the White House can pressure, you couldn't pressure Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You're not going to pressure Stephen Breyer. To the extent that Breyer is under any sort of pressure to retire, it's probably his thinking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but it also doesn't matter. If you replace Breyer with another progressive, you're still going to have a 5-seat real conservative majority, plus Roberts on most occasions. It doesn't really matter one way or the other. And yet they are just gung-ho for this stuff. The left, 15. Shattering the norms, open pressure campaigns on Supreme Court justices 10. To retire. The media, they're perfectly fine with it because they're in on it. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. Delighted to have you with me today. The phone number, should you wish to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Dan McLaughlin over at National Review has a really good piece out. It comes at a time, these 100 companies, the media is going gaga about it today. They took out a big ad spread in the New York Times. Yes, that they really want Americans to stand out and say, yeah, let's show that they're really connected to us. They took out a giant spread and advertising they're going to stand up against these states and their nasty election law reforms. They're coming for you, you know. It's kind of ridiculous what they're doing. I'm scrolling. Now, all the blue check marks on Twitter. Now, really, if we're honest about it, the reason the blue check marks on Twitter are so excited about it is because they took out an ad in a newspaper. Nobody takes out ads in newspapers anymore, and yet they did. And it's exactly where you go if you want no one in America to see what you're actually saying, but you want the press and the left to virtue signal just how thrilled they are that these corporations are standing up. Now, so Dan McLaughlin over at National Review has a really good piece out on how this really isn't the free market. You're hearing this now from a lot of conservatives thinking they need to stand up and they need to do something. And the left are like, are you opposed? Are you opposed to the First Amendment? I thought you thought corporations were people too. There are fair and vigorous debates to be had over the limits of corporate political activism. At what point does free speech become anti-democratic bullying? At what point is the waging of cultural crusades a dereliction of the duty of corporate managers to the best economic interests of the shareholders? Wherever you draw that line, it should be particularly worrisome when it's done at the behest of the ruling party to attack the integrity of our election system itself to the intended disadvantage of the opposition. The president and his party's lawyer are urging multiple major corporations to combine to restrain trade for the purpose of making it harder for its political opposition to win elections, and using lies to restrict the president's democratically elected critics from passing laws. If we saw this in another country, we would recognize it as a menacing step. Now, let me stop right there. I have said the entire time I've been on this here radio program that what's going to happen next is all the people on the left who abhorred Donald Trump and thought he was some authoritarian tyrant are themselves going to back an actual authoritarian tyrant who really is. And no, he's not. He's not Trump. No, he's not. He's not orange. No, he's not. He's not Trump. No, he's not. He doesn't live in Palm Beach. And they will justify, excuse, and deflect every sort of behavior on behalf of an actual authoritarian. Because of Trump, of course. They can blame it all on Trump. All right, back to McLaughlin's piece. This is happening now in the United States in the fight over the Georgia election law. It appears likely to happen again in other states considering similar laws. As the Washington Post reported this weekend, more than 100 chief executives and corporate leaders gathered online Saturday to discuss taking new action to combat the controversial state voting bills being considered across the country, including the one signed in Georgia. Executives from major airlines, retailers, and manufacturers, plus at least one NFL owner, talked about potential ways to show they oppose the legislation, including by halting donations to politicians who supported the bills and even delaying investments in states that passed the restrictive measures. Leaders from dozens of companies such as Delta, American, United, Starbucks, Target, LinkedIn, Levi Strauss, and the Boston Consulting Group, along with Atlanta Falcons owner Arthur Blank, were included on the Zoom call. The Wall Street Journal identified the CEO of Merck as one of the leading voices and noted a parallel effort among large law firms. The Post described this as an aggressive dialing up of corporate America's stand against controversial voting measures nationwide, a sign that their opposition to the laws didn't end. Now, McLaughlin adds this: free markets are all about voluntary exchanges between willing buyers and willing sellers. The point of so many major businesses coordinating their activity is to thwart the power of citizen boycotts of companies when they disapprove of those companies' acts. If consumers, or the states in their role as consumers, see such a broad united front, they will be less willing to be able to organize themselves to impose costs on the companies involved for participating in a dishonest anti-democratic campaign. It is one thing to boycott a single company, after all. It is much harder to boycott 100 of the biggest ones simultaneously. As Adam Smith, no critic of free market capitalism, once wrote, people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion. But the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. When the heads of major businesses with significant market power gather to agree on steps like collectively delaying investments, they're on dangerous ground for society and sometimes themselves. Legally, the Supreme Court has had to harmonize two areas of law. The court ruled in 1959 that group boycotts among competitors are per se violations of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Per se violations are the nuclear weapons of antitrust law. They declare certain categories of conduct unlawful, even without the need to prove that the companies involved had monopoly market power or had an unreasonable anti-competitive effect. But little in the law is ever that simple, especially in antitrust law. The court soon after clarified under the Norr-Pennington rule, named for two cases from the 1960s, that the First Amendment right to petition the government for redress of grievances protects corporations lobbying the government, even if the intent of the lobbying is to obtain anti-competitive advantages. In NAACP versus Claiborne Hardware in 1982, a case arising from a black boycott of white businesses in Mississippi, the court also found that participation in a citizen boycott can be protected under the First Amendment. But in 1990, in FTC versus Superior Court Trial Lawyers Association, the court explained why this immunity did not protect lawyers who organized a boycott of the Indigent Defense Program in Washington, D.C., in order to pressure the government to raise the rates it paid them. No violation, this is the Supreme Court, no violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act can be predicated upon mere attempts to influence the passage or enforcement of laws, even if the defendant's sole purpose is to impose a restraint upon the trade of their competitors. But in the Norr case, the alleged restraint of trade was the intended consequence of public action. In this case, the boycott was the means by which respondents sought to obtain favorable legislation. The restraint of trade that was implemented while the boycott lasted would have had precisely the same anti-competitive consequences during the period even though legislation had been enacted. The Norr immunity doctrine does not extend every concerted effort that is genuinely intended to influence government action. The court found that the attorneys were in a different position than the black citizen boycotters in the Claiborne Hardware case. Essentially, the extent that some of their businesses compete with each other, the corporate executives on Saturday's call would argue they're seeking no advantage for their companies, and it is more likely than not, even in the perennially unpredictable force of antitrust rules, that their argument would successfully immunize them from legal liability under federal antitrust law. But they would be so doing, openly admitting they're wielding the resources of major corporations for no economic benefit of their shareholders, for whom they owe a fiduciary duty as stewards of corporate assets, and that could put them in legal jeopardy. Essentially, what these corporations are doing is the bidding of Democratic activists. They're pressuring states to change rules, not on behalf of their shareholders, but because of Democrats. Mark Elias runs Democracy Docket. Democracy Docket is an organization helping fund these organize these corporations into doing what they're doing. But Elias is actually the Democrats' top lawyer. When Mark Elias calls your corporation and says, you better get on this phone call, you know he's operating on behalf of the majority power entity in Washington, D.C. right now. You don't think he's calling for Democracy Docket. You think he's calling for the president and the Democrats. And Ellis is calling these corporations, saying, you better get in on board this or else. He's urging them, politely, diplomatically urging them on behalf of Democracy Docket to get involved and stand up and take action. But nobody thinks he's doing that. Ellis runs Perkins, is in Perkins Coie. It's a law firm. What the Democrats very wisely have done, frankly, is they're routing most of their major outside campaign operations through this law firm. And in so doing, they're able to claim lawyer-client privilege on all sorts of activities that they're doing. In fact, Democracy Docket, it raises money through Act Blue, the left-wing organization that fundraises for Democrats. And its website is directly linked on Elias's Perkins Coie bio page. If his work, now this is Dan McLaughlin again, if Mark Elias's work on Democracy Docket is not actually billable work for his Democratic clients, it surely reflects the public profile of their representation serving his clients' interests. It is synonymous with the lawyer, and that lawyer is synonymous with the Democratic Party. In short, no reader of Mark Elias's bio or press notices or observers of his client list would see him simply as a random hired gun who speaks only for himself. When he tells corporate America what it must do, every boardroom in the country knows he's expressing the desires of the party that runs both the White House and Congress. And when those companies gather to carry out those directions to take the Democrats' side in a nakedly partisan dispute over elections, they are seeking favor with those in power against the domestic political opposition. You can call these a lot of things, but it's very far removed from a free market. And since it's very far removed from a free market, it necessitates a Republican response. It necessitates Republican states largely ignoring them and daring to watch them collaborate to cause economic harm to generate a Sherman Antitrust Act. The Republican states have got to stand up and fight. In Texas right now, these companies are colluding to bully Texas out of passing common sense election reform there. In Georgia, now that the legislation has passed, they're standing up and denouncing Georgia. Will Smith just moved a movie that he was filming for Apple TV Plus out of Georgia. Now these companies are taking out full-page ads in the New York Times bragging about what they're doing. At some point, Republicans have to stand and fight. They can't be held hostage. You got the NCAA now telling states you can't have a policy protecting girls' sports or else. Where are the brave conservatives in state government? Where are the brave Republicans? Brian Kemp in Georgia stood up. Will Greg Abbott stand up? It looks like he might. But you got to get this legislation through the Texas legislature. Around the country, Republicans are starting to stand up. Will these companies bully them? They can only bully some. Listen, this is the thing. If 100 companies stand together, it's really hard to boycott all of them. But if you got 20 states that stand together, it's really hard for these companies to boycott them, particularly when they're some of the most economic productive in the country. Two can play this game, and Republicans better play the game because the Democrats already are.
Honest news and conservative views.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. No coincidence, as the Democrats try to harness the power of companies to bully conservatives and bully states reforming their election laws. Here's a headline in Politico: Biden moves to leverage corporate America's falling out with the GOP. The business community doesn't dislike President Joe Biden's proposal to hike corporate taxes to pay for a massive $2 trillion infrastructure plan. They detest it. But there are some reasons to think corporate leaders are warming to Biden. They backed his COVID recovery plan, which pumped billions of dollars into hard-hit industries and small businesses. They know he comes from a business-friendly state that boasts more corporations than any other, and, well, he's not Donald Trump. Inside the White House, they are warming to corporate America, too. Biden and his team believe that while the two sides may be at loggerheads over tax rates, they can use business leaders to help move other policy priorities. They talk regularly with corporate America. The White House is considering forming an advisory group of business leaders. We said early on that we would engage the business community. We would reach out and we would have interaction. Cedric Richmond, director of the White House Office of Public Engagement, said in an interview. You have to realize those are major employers of probably millions of Americans. You can't not talk to them. The cautious courtship between corporate America and the Biden White House could play a critical role in the president's agenda as he advances an infrastructure bill through Congress and pushes politically fraught policies on immigration, racial justice, and gun violence without lawmakers. It also reflects a seismic shift in the landscape where not too long ago, Democrats found themselves trying to tamp down opposition from business leaders rather than working with them. Evidence of the involvement of politicians of corporations is growing. PayPal canceled plans to open a global operations center in Charlotte after North Carolina passed a law restricting transgender rights. Walmart and Dick's Sporting Goods raised the age of gun sales after the mass shooting at Parkland, Florida. It's become even more pronounced recently with Delta and Coca-Cola denouncing a contentious Georgia law that places new requirements on voting. Progressives in the Democratic Party are trying to co-opt businesses that have already largely gone woke. Most of the CEOs of these countries are godless secularists anyway. The rich elite in this country are increasingly hostile to the gospel message. They're increasingly hostile to social conservatives. Very few of them are actually practicing Christians. They're deeply hostile to faith and family values. I mean, my goodness, someone told me the other day that the CEO of Delta is on his fourth wife. They're already socially liberal. They just want to protect themselves. And this is why, by the way, corporate America in this country are the welfare queens of American society. Corporations, the Fortune 500 in this country, depend on the federal government protecting them. If Republicans want to ruthlessly go after the Fortune 500, what they should do is actually embrace being fully free market. Because the Fortune 500, particularly the Fortune 100 right now, they depend on the government making sure David can never slay Goliath. They depend on a playing field that is tilted towards them. Just take for example, the internet sales tax. The internet sales tax was supported by Amazon. Yes, the internet sales tax is supported by Amazon, a company that only sells online. Do you know why? Because the little guy who wants to compete against Amazon doesn't have the infrastructure to be able to handle the processing of the various sales taxes across the country like Amazon does. It's why Amazon supports increasing the minimum wage, because they know their smaller competitors will be hurt. It's why Amazon supported, what else have they supported? Amazon supports the corporate tax increase as well. They support the corporate tax increase. They support the internet tax. They support the rise in the minimum wage, all for competitive purposes. If the government wants to, if Republicans really want to take it to corporate America, actually embrace the creative destruction of the marketplace. Right now, the government has created so much moral hazard. That moral hazard allows companies to make bad decisions knowing Uncle Sam's going to bail them out or protect them. They know the federal government doesn't like the creative destruction of the marketplace. Frankly, it's time to embrace the creative destruction of the marketplace. It is time to embrace letting the big fail. And if Republicans are willing to do it, if they want to strike back without being punitive, without saying, hey, we're going to single you out because you spoke against us. No, don't single them out. That's arguably unconstitutional anyway. Just level the playing field. Let David slay Goliath. Get rid of the protections. Get rid of the tax exemptions. Get rid of the tax breaks. Get rid of the property tax abatements. Do all of that. Let the little guy become the big guy. Let the big guy fail.
30.
When we come back, the Biden administration wants to ramp up gun control issues. What do you do, though, with the rise of shootings out there? What can you yourself do? How can you get smart? I'm going to talk to someone who actually knows this stuff.
15.
How do you survive a shooting if something bad comes your way? What do you do? We'll discuss it. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here across the nation. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. The media gives incredible coverage these days to shootings around the country. Oftentimes, activists now to advance gun control, they will take a gang violence shooting and they'll add it to the stats of mass shootings to drive up the numbers. Their solution is gun confiscation, gun control, the president advancing an agenda. But the reality is now that there are still mass shootings at malls, at grocery stores, in schools. And a lot of people wonder, what could they do? What would they do? And in some states, people think, I'll do my best to carry and be able to protect me and my family if they're with me. But what about the realities of a mass shooting event if you happen to be involved in one? Well, there's someone out there who actually spends his time talking to people about what to do. And we figured it would be great to get Alan Burris on the program to talk about it. Now, Alan, if I'm butchering your name, I apologize. But for those who are here listening, this is Alan Burris, who you can go to surviveashooting.com and learn more. And Alan, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on, Eric. I appreciate it.
So let's talk about the basics here. School shootings, mass shootings, mall, grocery. We've seen these headlines in the last few weeks. They are increasingly a phenomenon in this country, although still rare. But what should people think about them, know about them, expect?
I think there's two really important things that everybody should have on their mind. One, get rid of the denial and accept the fact that they do happen and they can happen. And you're right, it's going to be rare that it happens to you, but they are going to happen to someone. And so we have to accept that personal responsibility that it could happen to us, and we are our own first responders, and we should have a simple plan in place for a situation if it were to happen.
I like that you said that we're our own first responders. My wife actually says that. She went to a school a while back, a gun training school, where they kind of reiterated that if you're waiting for 911, every second you wait is a second that you've put yourself in harm's way if you don't have a plan to be able to take care of yourself. And it really had an impact on her now. Regularly, when she goes places, she tries to make sure she knows where she's going, getting in, getting out, where the kids are at all times. Really changed her way of thinking on this stuff. How do you approach people on how they should retrain their thinking?
Well, often I start every class and lecture saying, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. And that is nothing against the brave men and women out there serving their communities. It's just the nature of the job. They don't respond until you call them. You don't call them until something bad has already happened. And that's what makes us our first responder. And I actually even had a person in the class. I was teaching with a captain of a police department. We were both up front. And one individual said, "Why do we need to know this? Isn't it your job?" to the police captain.
Ooh.
And he said the exact same thing I just did. He said, "Yes, it's my job, and I'll get there as quick as I can, but I want you to be able to survive until I get there." And that's what we're trying to teach you.
Yeah. So, okay. A lot of people, though, that they've got this in their head that, yes, the police are there to protect, but the police possibly they can't get there in time. And a lot of people, their idea is, I'm just going to hide and wait. When people get into a situation like this, the police aren't going to be there for a while. What's the first thing they should do?
The way I teach it, everybody knows run, hide, fight. And it's often taught in a linear, first you run, then you hide, and last you fight. I don't teach that way. I have a triangle. In the middle of the triangle, you have to act. You have to move. You have to do something. But what you do is there's arrows to the three corners. Escaping could be an option, and it's a great option if you can. Denying that killer access to you is the next option. That could be barricading, locking yourself in where they can't get in. It could be getting behind cover, something that's bulletproof they can't shoot through. And then the third option is defending yourself, fighting, attacking back. Say you're in the front of a classroom. We're in a college class. I'm sitting in the front right by the door. A killer bursts through that door. You're not going to escape. You're not going to hide or deny. You're going to have to take that guy out. And hopefully the couple people next to you are helping. If you're in the very back of the room, you're not going to be taking him out. Then maybe you can escape out the window, the back door, or get behind something bulletproof. So which of the three options you choose is always going to be based on the proximity of the killer and the location that you're in and your capability.
Yeah, capability, I think, is a big one, and increasingly, it seems like I don't know. We encounter stories of people who were heroic in trying to stop a shooter, but it also seems that there are also situations where people. It's hard to make this come across without sounding disparaging. I really don't mean it, but occasionally there are people who they're not. They react. But in their reaction, I don't know that they've thought through exactly what they're doing, and sometimes they could have done something different.
And that's why I like people to have a plan. And it doesn't have to be an elaborate plan. In fact, you want it to be very simple. And that's why, we just have the 3 points of the triangle: escape, deny, defend yourself. But which one you do, you can have a little training in all of those. And say you know that you're not a fighter. You just can't defend. It's just not in you for whatever reason. You better get good at the other two. If you can't escape easily because maybe you have a bad leg or something, well, you need to increase how you're going to deny people and how you're going to defend yourself. So you have to really do a self-assessment when you're making your plan as well.
Now, I'm curious, how did you get into teaching people how to survive shootings?
I've been teaching martial arts and self-defense for years. I started teaching Hapkido in the 90s, and I was doing safety and self-defense classes as well, which are different from martial arts. And it was after the Aurora shooting in Colorado, people started saying, Alan, what do you do in these situations? Because I was already teaching safety and self-defense. And that's when I sort of shifted gears. I started studying more on it. I took courses. I became certified by Safariland Training Group to teach their active shooter response course, which I taught with a cadre of great instructors, and I learned from those other instructors and learned by teaching. Did that for years. Then I decided to teach my own classes and decided to write the book that I wished would have been available when I got interested in the topic after that Aurora shoot.
Yeah, and this isn't what you do now. It's not something I would imagine people will say, hey, one day I'm going to grow up and I'm going to teach people how to survive this. It's just, it is a reality that we live in now. Let me ask you, there are, I'm sure, lots of business people, school administrators listening. If there's something they could do to preempt or have an immediate initial response to mitigate, what sort of things should they be thinking of?
One thing to prevent that I think is very important, and we teach, is you have a threat assessment team. And that could be one or two people in a small organization. It might be a group of people that also has law enforcement and a mental health professional on speed dial. And it's not that you get regular meetings, but when people, and this could be students, because we have had students report other kids to principals and vice principals, and they stop tragic things. It could be a coworker, because we've had coworkers report and stop tragic things. But when something is reported, you need to take it seriously and figure out if that is an actual threat, and if it is, get that person the help they need before they do something bad. And I think if we had more of that going on, we could prevent some of these, because a lot of them show signs beforehand, but those signs are sort of ignored often.
What signs do you think people should be paying attention to?
Something terrible goes on in a person's life, a divorce, a death, a firing, and their mood changes. They're down. They're depressed. They're buying extra firearms. They're not just, buying a hunting rifle and going out and zeroing it in for hunting season. But, the Virginia Tech killer, when they talked to a guy at a gun range, that Virginia Tech killer was on the gun range practicing shooting under desks and tables. I mean, walking and shooting like he was shooting under a desk or table. That's not normal behavior on a firing range. An active interest in these killers. I mean, if it's somebody like me studying them, okay, I have a reason. But why is Joe all of a sudden reading all these internet things about all these previous killers? Because we know they have learned from previous killers to get themselves better. The Virginia Tech guy, he chained the doors that prevented the law enforcement to get in as quickly because he learned that from the Amish killing when that guy barricaded and chained doors to keep the cops out from what he was doing to those girls in the Amish schoolhouse. So those kind of things, just a person is just not right. And sometimes we know we have those feelings, the intuition, and we need to be like Gavin DeBecker says in his book, Gift of Fear, pay attention to that intuition and those feelings and act upon it, and we could stop some bad things from happening.
We could. Listen, Alan, where can people go to find out more and learn more about you?
They can go to Survive a Shooting or Amazon for the book. They can go to reflexprotect.com for my training and other different products that we provide to help people stay safe and defend themselves.
It's unfortunately a more common thing, and also fascinating, the psychology and thought behind it. Alan, thank you very much for stopping by. I really do appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on, Eric.
Thank you. Alan Burris, survivashooting.com is his website. I guess after the Denver, Colorado shooting, he actually reached out proactively to us to talk about it. And it's unfortunately the age we live in. I realize that there are progressives out there who will say, well, if we would only pass gun regulation, except there's a problem that people on the left don't like to talk about, and that is that most of the people who are buying guns and doing these sorts of things, they're doing it under the law as it is. And those who aren't, no law is going to stop them. The shooter at the elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, killed a parent, took his parents' guns. No law was going to stop him there. And the shooter in Colorado, I believe, lawfully purchased his gun actually multiple days in advance. I think there have been several shootings like that with a 3-day waiting period, and they waited the 3 days. It didn't stop them. And the reality is we have a Second Amendment. My personal solution, people think I'm flippant when I say it, but my actual solution is that we should all have a gun. Every one of us should have a gun. Every one of us should conceal carry. And frankly, it's a constitutional right. And I think instead of trying to repeal the Second Amendment, maybe the government should give us all a gun and give us a tax credit on going to get trained on how to use it. Look, you think I'm making it up, but everybody says, well, let's just ban all the guns. Let's do like Australia did. We have a Second Amendment. They didn't. So let's think differently from them. And the way to think differently, I think, is to get everybody a gun and teach them how to use it to be safe. I think I'm really serious here. I really am. In Texas, the state house tomorrow is going to consider a permitless carry legislation. State Representative Matt Schaefer from Tyler, Texas, has this proposal. It got a number of co-sponsors with him on this. If you're interested in seeing it pass, if you text the word permit to 52886, if you live in Texas, if you're listening from Texas, text the word permit to 52886, and you will get a link back. Click it. You can generate an email to your member of the state house saying support this legislation, or if they already support it, to thank them for supporting it and encourage them. I realize it's not a popular, particularly after shootings. Here in Georgia, where I am, there was a permitless carry proposal. It died in the state house. The Speaker of the House openly admitted he killed it himself after the Atlanta spa shootings because he thought it was bad form to consider it then. Hopefully they'll bring it up this coming year. They need to pass it in Georgia. There are 20 states that have permitless carry. I would like Georgia to be one. I think Texas should be one. frankly, I think every state should do it. The more law-abiding citizens are trained in how to use guns and can protect themselves and their families without having to dial 911 and wait for the police to be there, I think the better off we'll all be.
You can follow Eric around social.
Welcome back. It's Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You know, I continue to be concerned with the situation in Minnesota where the police officer not only didn't get due process, but has now quit. The chief of police has quit, but the city manager who said that the police officer deserved due process for the shooting up there, the city manager was fired by the city council, and one of the members of the city council has come forward and said that the city manager was actually a great person, highly competent, but she voted to fire him because she was scared the mob would come for her. She voted to fire him not because she thought he needed to be fired, but because she was scared of the mob in the 21st century United States of America. And of course, they're attacking all police officers. They want to defund all police officers. The mayor up there of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, now saying police involved in traffic runs should not be carrying weapons. There's a growing call in Congress as well to reduce police funding. Now, the president, by the way, came out and said he disagrees with those calling for defunding the police. He knows it's a political hot button issue. But listen to Jason Johnson on MSNBC.
I've been saying we need to abolish American policing as it currently exists. It doesn't work. And we don't seem to have this sort of difficulty when we're talking about any other government agency. So, Nicole, I teach my class of Morgan State students before this. We were having this discussion with a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds. And I pointed out to them, I said, what's the graduation rate for high school kids in Baltimore? And the Baltimore graduation rate is only about 80%. People are always screaming, oh my gosh, Baltimore public schools are terrible. They need to be taken over by the state. They need to be taken over by the government. Only 80% of these kids graduate. You know the average homicides that are actually solved by police departments? Only about 35%. You know the number of rapes and sexual assaults that are solved by police departments? Less than 60%. You know the percentage likelihood of being shot unarmed as a black person is like 5 times as likely than a white person. Policing doesn't work the way we're doing it right now.
Bobby in Tyler, Texas. Going to go to you next. Bobby, thanks for calling in.
Yes, sir. Eric, I love your program.
Thank you.
And I'd like to tell you a real fast little story about I got pulled over about a week ago, and I was brought. Jeff kind of stole a little of my thunder there when I heard him say that. I agree with him 100%. That if you just cooperate with the police and do what they say, you may not respect the person, but you've got to respect that badge. Mm-hmm. And if you just do what they say, a lot of this wouldn't happen. And I was pulled over for not giving a left turn signal. And as a matter of fact, I didn't know I was being pulled over until I saw the lady. She was a lady policeman, and she pulled up behind me, and I was very respectful to her. I said, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and and it's just do what they say, and more than likely this wouldn't happen.
Yeah,
and I will say this: if some of these people that stay in their car and they're asked to get out, that wouldn't happen in another country. It wouldn't happen in China.
Right. Yeah, we got to put it in perspective. Bobby, thank you so much for that. We gotta put this stuff in perspective, and the perspective is that the guy in Minnesota who was shot had an outstanding warrant. It appears to be for aggravated burglary, and he struggled. Now, listen, the police officer. We need to stand in that light. Should the guy still be alive? Yes, she thought she pulled out her taser, and she actually pulled out her gun and shot him. The people who want to defund the police would defund their training, and we would have more of this. But also, we still have to maintain a level of common sense and honesty here that had this individual not fled because of an outstanding warrant, he would not have struggled with the police, and he wouldn't have gotten shot. There are two sides to the story. This isn't a matter of racism. Everybody wants to make it a matter of racism. And the problem is when you make them all about racism, none of them are about racism because some of them legitimately are in this country, and we shouldn't deny that. But people tune out when you take a situation like this where a guy, had he not struggled and run and had an outstanding warrant, she wouldn't have tried to pull her taser and gotten confused and pulled her gun. She wouldn't have done it. The story's a little more complex than what the progressives would like us to believe in this. And we need to accurately account for that. When we come back, is World War III upon us? Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here across the fruited plain. The phone number, should you wish to be a part of this here program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. If you're listening in Texas, there's a state action item for my listeners. If you text the word permit to 52886, you'll get back a link. Click it. You can generate an email automatically to your state representative urging passage of the constitutional carry legislation authored by Representative Matt Schaefer out there. Permitless carry. You'd be able to carry your firearm in public without needing a permit. Text the word permit to 52886. Let me just start here. I feel like I need to do this to start here to calm your nerves by saying I don't intend to want to depress you. I don't want to depress you, but I want to read you. So I subscribe to a Substack letter by a guy named John Ellis. He was in the Bush administration. He's a data nerd. He finds a lot of stories that other people don't. He puts a lot of stuff in context. This comes as well with, actually, you know what? Maybe I should do it this way. David French at the Dispatch. He's a little bit worried about are we headed to a World War III? And it's not just him. There's a growing sense that something wicked this way comes. It also comes at a time, for example, that so Warren Buffett, one of his big indicators for stock market crashes is when the value of the stock market exceeds GDP by so much, and we're at like 200%. It's been a long time sign of a market crash, and you'll have a lot of people now who are into tech stocks who say, well, that's not really the case now. That's an old metric. That metric doesn't hold up now. Things are new. Whenever you hear people start saying rules that have held up forever no longer hold up because we're in new times, you should probably be a little bit cautious because, well, they tend to be the people who embrace the new over the old oftentimes tend to be wrong. A lot of new technologies are just repackaging of old technologies. Like, for example, it's a great example. There's an app out. It's all the rage these days. All the kids have it. It's called Clubhouse. You're either a cool kid who has it or not. If you're on Android, you can't get it because you're not a cool kid to begin with if you're on Android. You got to have an iPhone. It's got to be iOS. And on Clubhouse, you can get together with people, and on your phone, you can chat. No, not text message chat. No. You can actually have a verbal oral conversation. It's like the phone, except the phone. It's called Clubhouse, and it's a group chat. It's like the old party line. Back before I was born, there were party lines you could call in, and everybody in the neighborhood can call in on a party line and chat to each other. That's what this is, except nationally on your phone. You can sit on your front porch at night when you don't have any friends, and you can chat to strangers on the internet and actually have a phone call in a group chat. And it's like, it's new. It's like an old party line. As an aside, I'm going to tell on myself here for a minute. When I was a kid, my best friend's name was Ryan Ivey. And this was in the 80s in rural Louisiana. And you did not, in your town, if you were calling just in your town, you did not have to have the prefix, like the first three digits. Not the area code, the three digits after the area code, the prefix. You didn't have to have it. So if your number was 1234, you just call 1234. And if you needed to call the next town over, you added that town's prefix. So 331, 1234. Well, my friend Ryan Ivey, his phone number was the exact same phone number as the Sears and Roebuck. And The Sears store was one town over, and oftentimes the people in town would forget to dial the prefix 683 for Clinton, Louisiana, and they just dial his home phone number. And he and I became masters of sounding like adults to take people's orders until his mother caught us one day and beat the snot out of us. But before that, way before even I was born, you didn't just have to dial just the 4 digits, or you pick up the phone and press 0 for the operator and tell them to connect you to so-and-so. You had a party line where everybody in the town could listen. Well, that's what Clubhouse is. It's a new technology, but it's just something old. And a lot of times when people who are into the new and shiny say, oh, well, the old rules don't apply. Well, you better hold up because the old rule's about to come smack them. There's no appreciation for those old rules. Warren Buffett swears by this rule, and the Buffett rule is flagging a stock market crash. Now, I want to read for you, and I realize David French is controversial for people on the right these days. I know and like David and his wife tremendously. We don't always agree, but, you can learn from people you disagree with on occasion. And I want to read some of this for you. At the risk of feeling old, earlier today I was on one of those websites that will tell you what percentage of Americans are older and younger than you. I'm 52, and that means more than 2/3 of my fellow citizens are younger than me. Why does that matter? Well, they can't relate to the glories of seeing the original Star Wars trilogy in the theaters. They've only seen documentaries about the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson rivalry. Oh, and they have absolutely no idea what it's like to worry about a world war. I grew up in the Cold War when bookstores stocked their shelves with books analyzing the balance of military power between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Debates about ICBMs and strategic bombers could monopolize public attention, and there were multiple war scares that kept Americans up at night with real fears about catastrophic conflict. Then 3 things happened in rapid succession that changed the world. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell and the Warsaw Pact unraveled. In February of 1991, the U.S. and its allies decisively defeated Iraq in the first Gulf War, and that December, the Soviet Union fell. Taken together, these events not only left the world with one global superpower, a hyperpower according to some, they established the absolute dominance of American arms. Since that time, America has faced economic shocks. It's endured a devastating terror attack that led to 2 long counterinsurgency conflicts, and it's faced a pandemic. But the world has been mercifully spared even the possibility of the kinds of great power conflicts that could spiral into world war. After all, who would be foolish enough to challenge the United States? It's against this backdrop that we can see the triviality of many of our current political arguments as a kind of luxury, a byproduct of peace and global stability. Did we really spend entire news cycles on Dr. Seuss? How important really is the location of Major League Baseball's All-Star Game? We certainly do clash over important issues, but the bulk of our energy and anger is consumed in culture war clashes the previous generation would have considered inconsequential. I raise this because I'm increasingly concerned the old world is coming back. I'm increasingly concerned the long peace might come to an end, and we might all be shocked when it does. We shouldn't be. 2 things are happening at once that should wake us up to the possibility that the world might change again, as dramatically as it did in 1989 and 1991, but with far more catastrophic consequences. First, American military hegemony is in doubt. Yes, we still have the strongest military, but our qualitative advantage is decreasing, and we face the possibility of actually losing a war. Second, our enemies are increasingly aware they're closing the gap and are now today engaged in dangerous and provocative actions. We might find ourselves quickly facing the most serious foreign policy crisis in a generation in Ukraine, Taiwan, or both. Let's first deal with the closing military gap. Here's a graphical representation of the shrinking American advantage over China, taken from the RAND Corporation. The short way of understanding it is dark green is good. It represents American military advantages. Orange and yellow are bad. The picture has it improved. War games look increasingly grim. It's actually pretty bad. Pretty bad compared to where we are and China is. In simulated combat in which China attempts to invade Taiwan, the results are sobering and the United States often loses. In tabletop exercises with America as the blue team facing off a red team resembling China, Taiwan's Air Force is wiped out within minutes. U.S. air bases across the Pacific come under attack, and American warships and aircraft are held at bay by the long reach of China's vast missile arsenal. Even when the blue team in our simulations and war games intervened in a determined way, they don't always succeed in defeating the invasion. Why is this relevant? China is engaged in escalating dangerous provocations near Taiwan, dispatching ever larger numbers of fighters and military bombers to Taiwanese airspace. In a smart and ominous editorial, my former colleagues at National Review warned that a Chinese attack on Taiwan is getting closer. They don't argue war is imminent, but as the military gap closes, the determination to take Taiwan persists. But he goes on to point out it's not just them, it's Russia as well. The Russians are increasingly agitating around its borders, building up military to go into Crimea. Europe is nervous. To be clear, unlike an attack on a NATO member state like Estonia, neither an invasion of Ukraine nor an attack on Taiwan requires an American military response. No defense treaty compels an American defense. In fact, I'd be surprised if the U.S. fought for Ukraine, but history teaches us that large-scale combat has unpredictable consequences. It's fair to say that when Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia in 1914, few Americans imagined that less than 3 years away, they'd be mobilizing for trench warfare in France. Taiwan's a different story. While we're not bound to defend Taiwan, we've long planned to come to its aid, and an attack on Taiwan would almost certainly draw American forces into battle. That's why a Taiwan conflict seems less likely in the short run than serious conflict in Ukraine, but less likely is a long, long way away from impossible. French hopes he's being alarmist. I don't know that he is. At the same time, we're moving away from Afghanistan. The Biden administration, I think, is a terrible, terrible, terrible look to say we're going to walk away from Afghanistan on September 11th this year. We certainly, George Packer notes that the purpose of the Afghan war was to prevent terrorists from using Afghanistan to stage attacks on the United States. America could have declared victory and gone home years ago. But if the purpose was to help build a durable state to prevent the Taliban from taking power again, destroying the hard-won progress made by millions of Afghan citizens, and perhaps allowing radical Islamists to regain a base in Afghan soil, then the longest war in U.S. history is ending in defeat. It's a humbling moment. We walk away at the time the Russians also walked away from Afghanistan back in the day, never failing to really impose any semblance of order on it. At the same time, Russia on Tuesday called the United States an adversary and told U.S. warships to stay well away from Crimea for their own good, calling their deployment in the Black Sea a provocation designed to test Russian nerves. Moscow annexed Crimea, and 2 U.S. warships are due to arrive in the Black Sea this week amid escalating fighting. The U.S. and NATO, anxious about a major troop buildup in Russia towards Ukraine, signaled strong support for the Kiev government. Additionally, the American military is announcing they're walking back Donald Trump's plans to downsize in Europe and instead are sending more troops to Germany. Chris Dodd, former Democratic senator from Connecticut, and Richard Armitage, a former State Department official, and James Steinberg, another former Deputy Secretary of State, are moving into Taiwan to have diplomatic meetings as China escalates its combat drills there. The U.S. is urging Japan to issue a statement in defense of Taiwan. Iran announced that it's going to enrich uranium at a level of 60% purity, 3 times the current level, and closer to needed to make a bomb. I don't pay attention now, but Germany is having geopolitical problems. The German government looks on the verge of collapsing as Angela Merkel retires, and the Christian Democrats can't decide on a new leader. They're battling it out. Chaos appears on the horizon. Events change things. I always say this, events change things. Harold Macmillan, the British Prime Minister, was asked one time, coming in a wave of government support, how things could disrupt his mandate, and he said, events, dear boy, events. Events change things. Hopefully, events change things and things de-escalate. But at this point, China wants to stretch its leg, not being a regional power, but a global superpower. Russia looks like it wants to stretch its legs into being a more regional power. The United States, we're squabbling over whether boys can become girls. This isn't a healthy global situation. The world actually needs American leadership for stability, and we've given it up and turned inward. And every time we turn inward like this, we get a global war. I don't want to panic anybody, but we need to start thinking and planning and preparing for a future that is less certain than the future we think we're headed into. planning actually helps, preparing actually helps. And I don't know that this government in the United States is capable of doing that when they seem more likely to want to rally corporations to bully conservatives around the country than rally nations to stand up to bullies on the world stage.
Honest news and conservative views.
Never separated.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. I am delighted to have you with me. The phone number, if you'd like to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. If it's allergy season where you are, or it's fish fry season and you got to do it in the house, you need the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. It's an air purifier. It's great against odors. It's also good for pollen. It's good for mold. It's good for bacteria. And it fits in the palm of your hand. You can take this sucker with you. You're traveling, like, for example, I have got to go to Louisiana in a week to get my dad, take him down to Florida to see his brother who's been in poor health. And I am going to stay in a building that was built before the Civil War. And the last time I stayed there, my allergies went nuts. And it's a great place, don't get me wrong. It's just old. I'm taking my Eden Pure with me. Why? Because It can fit in the palm of my hand. It can use a USB outlet. It can plug into a wall. It is great for a room. You need clean air. You need to get rid of the smells. You need to get rid of the mustiness. You need to get rid of the mold, the pollen. Man, is it great. What you need to do if you want one of these, and again, this thing fits in the palm of your hand and it works great. You can take it from room to room. If you're doing a fish fry in the kitchen, put it there, help get rid of the odors. It is the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. That's what you want. You go to EdenPureDeals.com. You'll get $10 off the lowest sale price. You use the code word Erick, my name, Erick, ERICK, at checkout. The website is EdenPureDeals.com. Eden, like the Garden of Eden. It will get rid of the odors. It will get rid of the pollen and dust. It's great for mildew and mold. I will be traveling with it. My son uses it in his room. And, the proof that it works is that without it, he was waking up with a snotty nose every morning from just sleep. And he doesn't anymore because the Eden Pure works as advertised. EdenPureDeals.com is the website. Use my name, Erick, ERICK, at checkout to get $10 off their lowest sale price. And thanks to them for sponsoring the program. Let me explain this. I'm getting emails from people asking what the deal is. And as I stretch this show beyond the borders of my home state, let me just talk about political activism. It's one thing for a radio show host to tell you what to think and what their opinion of something is. What I try to do in most cases, some stuff just thoroughly hacks me off and I go straight to tell you what I think about it. But what I try to do is provide you some just analysis of what's going on out there, some actual real world analysis, not my opinion, but just here are the facts that go for me, the facts that go against me, how I reconcile the facts to arrive at my opinion based on my worldview. I try to do that. I try to occasionally be engaging and make you laugh, sometimes better than others. Sometimes I find the older I get that I have a sense of humor that only I appreciate and the rest of you suck. Like that, for example. But occasionally, I also think it's always infuriated me. And Rush Limbaugh was a dear friend of mine. And Rush actually would sometimes get aggravated with me for the activist component of stuff. I shouldn't be the conservative enforcer. And I always thought if I don't do it, nobody's going to, and somebody needs to just call BS and say this isn't conservative, but also need to be able to rally people to get them involved in politics. And so I've got this action center where if there's a piece of legislation in Congress or in states, I can get listeners around the country to engage with their congressmen or in particular states to engage there. You shouldn't be passive in your listening. You should want to be a participant in American democracy, in our republic. And right now in Texas, they're considering concealed carry legislation. So if you're a listener in Texas and you text the word permit to 52886, you'll get a text message back to my action center where you can go engage your members of the Texas legislature and tell them it's time to pass permitless carry so law-abiding citizens don't need government permission to carry their firearms in public. Go do it. Greetings. Hello, it is Erick Erickson here. Welcome back. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dwell on this today, but it really does aggravate me a lot, the damage being done by the government to their own cause, total incompetence. John Avlon on CNN actually did a piece on this, and I agree with him here, and you need to hear some of this.
We're in a race between COVID-19 variants and the vaccines, which is why it was surprising to hear that Johnson & Johnson's will be put on pause while the CDC and FDA look into concerns about blood clots. Must be serious, right? Objectively, no. It turns out that 6 women had blood clots within 2 weeks of taking that vaccine. 1 has died, and that is a tragedy. But context is key. And this is out of nearly 7 million doses administered at that time. So even if the vaccine is proven to be behind these blood clots, the chances of it happening to you is literally less than 1 in a million. In the risk-reward calculus of life, this is not a tough call. By comparison, there's more of a chance that you'll be struck by lightning this year, which is 1 in 700,000. There's also more of a chance of being hit and killed by a satellite falling from space, according to NASA. Well, to put it in more terrestrial terms, the chance of dying in a car crash is around 12 in 100,000. This is not to diminish the pain of the people who've suffered side effects, but it is an attempt to put this into perspective, because your chance of getting COVID if you haven't been vaccinated is far greater. In fact, get this. You're more than over 200 times more likely to get COVID-19 today than to develop one of these rare clotting events. But why did they pause it? An abundance of caution is the most generous explanation, because this unproven possible side effect is very similar to concerns in Europe about the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is still available there. In some states, people with J&J appointments can show up and get another brand. In other states, appointments are being canceled for the time being. And this is not good. Public health is hard. Don't take it for granted. Perfect is never on the menu.
Perfect is never on the menu. Can we just let me spend a moment here? Actually, I want to play one more clip for you. Nate Silver. You know, Nate Silver of 538. He's the Democrat who came to fame by calling the Obama race in large part because he had access to their internals. He was a ESPN sports guy, statistician. Now does a lot of politics. Well, he's being blasted by a healthcare expert epidemiologist on CNN.
Legal guru Nate Silver, he tweeted this: 6 cases out of 7 million people. What a disaster. Irony. This is going to get people killed, he tweeted. It's going to create more vaccine hesitancy. These people don't understand cost-benefit analysis. They keep making mistakes by orders of magnitude. He does say that, confidence in the AstraZeneca vaccines has plummeted in Europe after its distribution was paused for a few weeks ago rather. So if the risk isn't so great that people can still get the vaccine, I guess the question is it worth potentially undermining the public's faith in the safety of vaccines?
Well, with all due respect to Nate Silver, he is not an expert on the psychology of vaccines and vaccine confidence. And you have 2 major drivers of lack of confidence in vaccines, one of which is worry about safety and efficacy. The other is a lack of trust in the health system and in government.
Okay, let's just stop there. This is Cecile Gounder, infectious disease expert and CNN medical analyst. Taking it to Nate Silver. People distrust government. The government of the United States right now seems to not understand risk analysis. And they can no longer blame Donald Trump here. They're trying to blame Republicans and say, well, it's the Republicans who don't want the vaccine. They're rushing out polling to show it's evangelicals. You know, those evangelicals, they don't want the vaccine. They somehow think it's God's will if they get sick. They're unwilling to accept that the government itself, this government, Joe Biden's government, Democrats, are screwing it up. The contempt for Nate Silver pointing out that they're screwing up the messaging, and this supposed expert on CNN says, well, one reason people are hesitant is they don't trust the government. how much more likely are they to trust the government now when they think the government rushed out a vaccine for the government to say, oh, well, you could die taking it, so we're going to pause it. And a few weeks later say, well, actually, we're going to let you take it. You have a greater risk if you're a woman. And by the way, these blood clots overwhelmingly are affecting women, not men. The vaccine is still perfectly safe for men, but you don't hear that in the messaging, and they want to pause it nonetheless. But if you're a woman, you have a greater risk of getting a blood clot from taking birth control pills than from getting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There is already skepticism in America that they rushed the vaccines. Now, part of that is this reason. Normally, it takes years to get a vaccine through development because you have a very small pool of people who are willing to take the vaccine. And you have limited trial runs of a couple hundred people at a time, and you have to build that up. It could take 5 years of testing through pools and pools and pools of random samples of people in order to get it. In the case of the COVID vaccines, more people volunteered to take the COVID vaccine in 1 year than take a standard vaccination, volunteer to take a standard vaccination over a 5-year period. Did you know that? You had over 70,000 people willing to take it and gauge the results. And the results are staggering. It is a miracle of modern medicine just how safe these are. Not only just how safe they are, but how effective they are. The COVID vaccine is more effective at preventing COVID, including all the variants out there, than the flu vaccine is at keeping you from getting the flu. You can get the flu vaccine and still get the flu. In fact, you're more likely to get the flu after taking the flu vaccine than you are to get COVID after taking the COVID vaccine. And those who do get COVID have mild cases. There's not a single case globally of someone getting COVID after getting the COVID vaccine and then dying of COVID. But you never know this stuff from the government. The government doesn't tell you the stuff. The government constantly muddies the message. In fact, the government's message right now to incentivize you to go get the vaccine is go get the vaccine and then go lock yourself inside again. Keep your mask on, keep your latex gloves on, and don't touch your family. That's the message the government is selling you on getting the vaccine. It's not a go back to normal, go back to life message. It's a risk-averse message. It is a message of keeping you locked down in perpetuity. As opposed to saying, how much more likely do you think it would have been if this administration and the last had come out and said, go get the vaccine and then live your life. Wait 2 weeks, take both rounds for the Moderna and Pfizer, take the 1 round Johnson & Johnson, wait 2 weeks from the date of the last round of your vaccine, and then take your mask off and live life. How much more different do you think the messaging would be? How much more different do you think the willingness to get the vaccine would be? Instead, we have government experts come out and say, well, 7 million taking it. It's six got this clot. We're going to pause for a week. It's Johnson & Johnson. It's Johnson & Johnson. It's Johnson & Johnson. It's Johnson & Johnson. People aren't going to hear it's Johnson & Johnson because when they go get their shot, I had this experience. I went and got my vaccine. I didn't know whether I was getting Pfizer or Moderna until I got there. I had to ask. I got Moderna. The government is risk adverse. Bureaucrats aren't willing to take risk. And this, by the way, this isn't a healthy sign for the larger issue. The larger issue is there is clearly something happening on the planet, globally, internationally, with other countries feeling like the United States has either gone back to sleep or is distracted, is looking inward, we're squabbling with ourselves. And so these other countries are looking lustily at the world thinking, hey, you know what, I'm going to take a little territory here. I'm going to take a little more here. We used to own this 1,000 years ago. We're going to take it back now. And what can the United States do? The United States is divided. It's near bankruptcy. Its people are sick. And the United States isn't looking at any of this. Our government, and by the way, this is larger. This is not a partisan point. This is not about Joe Biden. This is the entire United States government at this point, Republican and Democrat alike, seems incapable of taking risks. They seem tribal and inward. They're doing what's best for their side, not best for the country. It's a terrible way to go about governance at a time China, Russia, and Iran appear to be a new axis of evil. They may have Turkey on their side, a supposed NATO ally where we have bases working against us. And the American government across the board seems devoid of ideas, incapable of taking risks, incapable of thinking differently because we're much more concerned at a governmental level about whether boys can have surgery to become girls than whether China might invade Taiwan. The government of the United States is much more comfortable fighting a culture war against conservatives and Christians in this country than going after the Chinese who persecute Christians and put Muslims in concentration camps. And American business is aligned in the same way. American intergovernmental agencies are aligned the same way. The Hollywood film industry is aligned the same way. Disney is perfectly happy to go use slave labor in China to run their films, and Nike is perfectly happy to virtue signal with Colin Kaepernick here while using Chinese slave labor essentially to make their goods in China. The nation seems to turn a blind eye to evil. And when anyone pops up and says, hey, maybe the government should do differently because they're kind of ruining their message on just the vaccine, for example, the government and the talking heads who fluff up the government go out and attack anyone who dares to say, maybe do it differently. Dr. Fauci comes out and muddies the message every day now. He's become the government's worst enemy. I can't tell you the number of people I know who say, at the beginning, I trusted Fauci. And it seemed like when the Trump administration was there, he had a clear message. And now that the Biden administration is there, he has a muddied message and talks out of both sides of his mouth. What's going on? No message discipline. And ultimately, that does, to make a partisan point, come back to the head. Comes back to where the buck stops, which is the President of the United States, who himself, I think, is in charge, contrary to some people wondering if he is or isn't. But he's 80 years old almost. He's tired mentally. He wears out quickly. It's hard for him to make the decisions. And the media, of course, is in circle the wagons mode. The media is so fearful of another Donald Trump that they will give incompetence a pass as long as incompetence comes with a D next to it. This isn't healthy for us in any aspect of our society right now. It's not healthy. The Russians and the Chinese on the outside are rattling the chains. They're like the velociraptors in Jurassic Park, constantly testing the perimeter to see if the electricity's gone out of it. And in this country, you got a president of the United States. The electricity goes out of him in the afternoons. He's got to go take a nap. He gets worn out. And this isn't to cast aspersions on him at his age, but we do need to acknowledge he's the oldest man to ever be president of the United States. Yes, he makes the decisions, but my goodness, how slow it goes sometimes. And he gets distracted by the infighting in his administration, and his entire party is about to go into a civil war over wokes. For the government of the United States to be as risk-averse as it is right now, they're allowing other countries to take risks and win because we're not even fighting back when they take the risks. And they know there's going to be a lot of reward because we are sitting on the sidelines. And it has everything to do with American leadership. And I don't mean Joe Biden. I mean Washington in general, Republican and Democrat alike. And all of us are so focused on Washington, we've lost focus on our own backyards. And so our backyards are crumbling as well. Again, I'm a big proponent of Jeremiah 29. Seek the welfare of the city in which you live and pray for it. There you'll find your welfare. Every one of us has to be fixated on Washington or feel we must. And we've ignored our own backyards. You want to truly make America great again? Focus on your backyard. Stop obsessing about Washington. But how can we not when Washington itself seems completely asleep at every single switch that's out there that requires the government? They won't even take a risk of flipping the right switch at this point.
You can follow Erick around social media
are y'all? I hope you're having a good day. All right. It is Erick Erickson here. If you're just tuning in, I got to play you this clip from Dick Durbin, the senator from Illinois.
What we are seeing with Dante Wright and with George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor, with Laquan McDonald is just a repetition, sadly, a repetition on almost a daily basis of gun violence and a repetition of racial incidents that are absolutely unacceptable in this country. And for those, and I join those who've criticized the other side who say we're just cancel culture, we want to cancel racism in America. That is the bottom line.
We want to cancel racism in America. Listen, I don't mean to get all theological with y'all, but what is racism at root? It's a sin. Now, if you're not a religious person, just consider it a flaw in humanity. There has always been and will always be racism, and we should work to overcome it. We should denounce it when we see it. But one of the great problems now is that people on the left want to define everything they don't like as racism. And there are a lot of things that aren't racism. Being against a student loan bailout does not make you a racist. Being unwilling to denounce yourself for privilege doesn't make you a racist. Again, on the left, it does. What's happening is it's harder and harder to take people seriously who scream on and on constantly about racism because so much of what they want is actually racial. The whole idea, a growing body of college campuses now, keeping people separated and segregated based on race. Have y'all read this thing? It's circulating. Bari Weiss has she was at the New York Times. The wokes chased her away. She's now got a Substack. And this is a teacher writing. Listen to this. I am a teacher at Grace Church High School in Manhattan. 10 years ago, I changed careers when I discovered how rewarding it is to help young people explore the truth and beauty of mathematics. I love my work. As a teacher, my first obligation is to my students. But right now, my school is asking me to embrace anti-racism training and pedagogy that I believe is deeply harmful to them and to any person who seeks to nurture the virtues of curiosity, empathy, and understanding. Anti-racist training sounds righteous, but it is the opposite of truth in advertising. It requires teachers like myself to treat students differently on the basis of race. Furthermore, in order to maintain a united front for our students, teachers at Grace are directed to confine our doubts about this pedagogical framework to conversations with an in-house Office of Community Engagement for whom every significant objection leads to a foregone conclusion. Any doubting students are likewise challenged to reframe their views to conform to this orthodoxy. My school, like so many others, induces students via shame and sophistry to identify primarily with their race before their individual identities are fully formed. Students are pressured to conform their opinions to those broadly associated with their race and gender and to minimize or dismiss individual experiences that don't match those assumptions. The morally compromised status of oppressor is assigned to one group of students based on their immutable characteristics. In the meantime, dependency, resentment, and moral superiority are cultivated in students considered oppressed. All of this is done in the name of equity, but it is the opposite of fair. In reality, all this reinforces the worst impulses. Now get this, pay attention to this part here. Recently, I raised questions about this ideology at a mandatory whites-only student and faculty Zoom meeting. Racially segregated sessions are now commonplace at the school. It was a bait-and-switch self-care seminar that labeled objectivity, individualism, fear of open conflict, and even a right to conform as characteristics of white supremacy. Get that? Objectivity, individualism, fear of open conflict, and even a right to conform are characteristics of white supremacy. I doubted that these human attributes, many of them virtues reframed as vices, should be racialized. In the Zoom chat, I questioned whether one must define oneself in terms of a racial identity at all. My goal was to model for students that they should feel safe to ask ideological assertions if they felt moved to do so. It seemed like my questions broke the ice. Students and even a few teachers offered a broad range of questions and observations. Many students said it was a more productive and substantive discussion than they expected. However, When my questions were shared outside this forum, violating the school norm of confidentiality, I was informed by the head of the high school that my philosophical challenges had caused harm to students. Given that these topics were life and death matters about people's flesh and blood and bone, I was reprimanded for acting like an independent agent of a set of principles or ideas or beliefs, and I was told that by doing so, I failed to serve the greater good and the higher truth. He informed me I had created dissonance for vulnerable and unformed thinkers and neurological disturbance in students' beings and systems. The school's director of studies added that the remarks could be harassment. A few days later, the head of school ordered all high school advisors to read a public reprimand of my conduct out loud to every student in the school. It was a surreal experience walking the halls and hearing the words emitted from each classroom. Events from last week compel us to underscore some aspects of our mission and share some thoughts about our community. At independent schools, with their history of predominantly white populations, racism concludes with other forms of bias to undermine our stated ideals, and we must work hard to undo that history. This was a struggle session. This is Maoist. This is happening in elite, white, private schools across the country. New York is one of the worst off places for this to happen. They are indoctrinating students, not teaching students.
30.
And they've gone back to racism. The wokes define people by their skin color, which is racism. Bailing out the student loan industry or opposition thereto is not racism.
15.
Defining people by their race is racism, and it's the white wokes who are doing it. Pretty soon they'll all be alt-right.